Hey, welcome back to Gold Shields. I'm Dan Murphy, along with my partner in crime, Tom Smith. Every week, we bring you the most compelling true crime cases told directly by the detectives and investigators who made those cases. And we have special episodes too with different um, things that are on the periphery of police work and investigative work in general. But we try to keep your attention with the big stuff. This morning, let me tell you first, quick, about one of the friends of the show is Fairline Defense. And I think Tom can agree with me. If you carry legally in this country, you need an insurance policy. You need an umbrella watching out for you, right, Tom?
You do, because when you have a carry permit, you have to have a backup. You have to have someone in your corner in the event you use it, which you never want to do, but it happens, and that's why you have it to protect yourself, and you need someone in your corner protecting your rights.
hmm Fairline Defense does just that. They provide a comprehensive coverage and legal backing for all self defense situations, offering peace of mind in those tough split second moments. They've got your back. What truly sets them apart, though, is they're the only system out there for armed professionals on and off duty. We're talking security guards, bail enforcement officers, correctional staff, and many more who carry as part of their living. Finally, getting the protection they deserve. Here's some of the things they offer: unlimited criminal defense to protect your freedom and interests during a criminal prosecution. Unlimited. Up to 1.5 million in civil defense expenses and attorney's fees. So you got the best legal representation you can get. They have a 24/7 critical response team ready to assist you, which is really nice. You need it. $1,000 a day per diem for lost wages resulting from court appearances. 100% payback if you lose. I mean, in the event that you were wrong or found to be wrong, you don't know anything. So, folks, don't wait for trouble to find you. Get ahead with Fairline Defense. This makes so much sense, Tom. And I'm talking a lot right now to Second Amendment people, people who like to carry and exercise that right, but also retired police officers who may not always mentally make the change to being a civilian, because civilian carry laws are very restrictive, aren't they?
They are, and they're changing every day because of the political sphere that's going on in the country today. So it's constantly updated, it's constantly changing, and Fairline gives you the most up-to-date coverage that's needed. And listen, that decision you make to use your firearm is life-changing. So to have someone have the comfort of knowing someone's in your corner when that event, if that event happens, is a blessing. And they're there for you. They're there for everybody. And Fairline Defense is in our corner at Gold Shield, so we're happy that they're providing this for law enforcement officers and the public.
So, for the cost of a trip for two people to Starbucks, basically every month, you've got protection 8 ways to Sunday with Fairline Defense. FairlineDefense.com. Check them out. Great move if you like to carry. Tom, who do we have today?
Well, we got Gary Eddington, who is going to be an outstanding guest with his career, counterterrorism, Iraq, 9/11, and a couple of ones. I watched him give an interview the other day on a show, and a couple of cases he was involved in that I didn't know about that we're going to hold and let Gary explain. Uh, One more thing I want to do is give a shout out to a such a special person to us at
Awesome. Awesome
Gold
lady.
Shields. Tanya Owen is as close a friend to this show and to me and you, Danny, personally, that we have. Tanya just did an outstanding keynote speaking event at the California Reserve Officers National Conference in Lake Tahoe. And the reception she got was unbelievable. And her story is so compelling and heartbreaking, but so inspirational of what she went through in her life when her husband, Steve Owen, was assassinated as a member of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office as a sergeant. And Tanya was a detective in that department as well when it happened. Her story of faith and just rising from what happened to her is so inspiring. And we want to get her name out there as much as we can with her book, After the Badge, which is another great memoir for her with her memory of Steve and what she had to go through. And she's an inspiration. She's a warrior. We said it during her show, which if anyone is interested, it's episode 19 of Gold Shields. Go back. It to this date, it's our highest rated show. it's our longest show. It's 2 hours of Tanya going through her story, and will just light you up, with inspiration, after hearing her speak. So we want to give you her email address, which she said was okay to do because you can order her book on her email address, which is owen264927 at gmail.com. You can order her book on that and get some advice from her, and also set up a schedule for her to be a keynote speaker at some event that you have. Again, it's Owen264927 at gmail.com. Special lady, Danny, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't say enough about Tanya. We're so proud to be affiliated with her. She's the picture of resilience, grace, strength, courage, commitment. Just a good-hearted person, and we're so happy to be affiliated with her and friends. Our book is Behind the Badge, After the Badge. I get the title right, Dan, right? We have a lot of guests. We get a lot of books. We love them. But yeah, After the Badge, Tanya Owen. Order it at her website. Keep her in mind for keynote speaking opportunities too. If you're going to have an event, you'll never have anybody so take an audience and lift them up through her experiences than you will, Tanya. Well, we're going to be back in just a minute with our guest today. We look forward to it. Don't go anywhere. Hey, we're back, and we can't be more excited or more anticipatory for today's guest, Gary Edgington, who we've just been chatting with for a minute or two. But oh my gosh, you're in for a treat today, ladies and gentlemen. If you're listening to this show, you are in for a treat, right, Tom?
Oh, it's we one of our titles is to give people a backstage pass. Just to give everyone a backstage pass, we just spent a half hour laughing
Yeah,
hysterically at stories we were just telling, and just said, "All right, we have to stop this and press record and start the damn
yeah,
show." Uh,
absolutely.
so Danny, tell us about Gary.
Gary, I mean, one of a kind person. Loads of experience in law enforcement in California, patrolling the beaches. Must have been tough, Gary. I don't know how you did it. Yeah, he's got a very special, unique story though. He followed his dad into law enforcement. He'll tell you about that. And then he made his way to the L.A. County District Attorney's Office as an investigator and was part of some groundbreaking, if not global news cases that he'll discuss as well. Um, then he took his experience in service overseas, and he'll tell you more about that. And he's an author to boot of a book that I'm reading right now, and I can't put down. Outside the Wire, phenomenal,
That's it.
phenomenal novel that is just true to life kind of novel. But we are so proud to have you and so honored, Gary Edgington. Welcome to Gold Shields.
Hey man, I am so proud and honored myself to be a guest on your
And at
show.
that
I
moment, it's
mean,
for you.
you have the cream of the crop, and for me to be among the chosen is truly humbling. I assure you. Believe me, I
Well,
assure you of that.
thank you for that. We've been very blessed, and we're very honored to have the guests we've had on, and you're one of them. So, thanks for bringing your time with us this morning. Your career, fascinating stuff. Give us a little glimpse. Where'd you grow up? How did you get on the journey you got on?
Well, I grew up in a tiny little cow town called Los Angeles, in the heart of TV and Screenland, a town called Culver City, which is where MGM, Selznick Studios, RKO, all the big studios were there. So I grew up around that, and my dad, until 1964, was a chief petty officer in the Coast Guard. So I kind of grew up around that too. Went to the Navy base all the time, got the 50-cent haircuts from the Filipino barbers and all of that fun stuff too. And but it was we used to, we family vacations, Yellowstone, load up the station wagon, all of that you know pretty typical stuff. And then in 64 he went to work for the LA County Harbor Patrol, and he was like 30 something years old when he went through the LA County Sheriff's Academy. And I to this day, I don't know how he did it, because I never saw the man do a push up in his life, never once. And I know damn good well they beat him pretty badly over there, because this was back in the old days where there was no sense of humor and they tortured you. And so, but I, you know, he's one of those guys that just did it. He just did it, and he worked for the LA County Harbor Patrol in Marina del Rey, and that's actually him right there on that plaque right there, and that's sort of where I kind of got the bug to go into law enforcement myself, and I. Started out as an explorer, a police explorer with the Culver City Police Department, and that was an eye-opening experience. A lot of fun and great guys that I worked with there, and then I got hired as a cadet there, and then eventually got hired as a police officer by the Manhattan Beach Police Department, which, as you alluded to, was basically a lot of bikinis and booze. The drunkest humans I've ever seen in my life were in Manhattan Beach, and I kid you not. I mean, we when we would do especially on graveyard morning watch, we called it morning watch there, a lot of DUIs, a lot of what we call deuces, and back then, I don't know about you guys in New York, but back then we had this thing called dial a deuce, and dial a deuce was a card that you put on a machine and you break this vial of some kind of friggin' acid that would ruin your uniform if you got it on you, and you stick it in this thing, and you have the guy blow in the thing, and it, it supposedly would move the card, and then you press this little thing down that had ink on it, and that was that was the reading on the machine. Does anybody see a potential problem with this? I'm just curious. Okay, that's why it was called dial-a-deuce. Now, mind you, you didn't need to do that, because I swear to you, if you booked less than an O1, we called it a chippy deuce, which is a highway patrol thing, which is their traffic. And so naturally they're much more stringent about booking more marginal things. So I don't think I booked anything less than a 1-2 or a 1-3. And I mean, people just absolutely blotto. In fact, one time I was by myself. I just got kicked loose, and I was in an L car, one man car, and I'm minding my own business about 2 o'clock in the morning, driving northbound on Pacific Coast Highway, and I see this guy walking across the street like 80, 90 yards away, and as I approach, he's on the other side. And then all of a sudden, I hear this crash, and I see this thing flying through the air, and it was him. He got nailed, and his blood alcohol level was in the threes. I don't even know how you survive at that.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a career drunk and closed a bar. And I got on the radio and I'm screaming, injury, traffic accident. Everybody rolls code 3, lights and sirens, because they think I was in the accident. and then, it wasn't. It was, this poor guy who got killed. And but it was an interesting place. Great people I worked with there. And I transferred over to Beverly Hills PD, which paid a lot more money and was a much bigger department, better equipment and things like that. And I did about 2 years in patrol or 3 years in patrol and 3 years in detectives. And that's where I really got the bug for investigations. And that's where my entire career, I've got of my roughly 30 years, 26 are in investigations. Almost everything else is, just a little bit of patrol. I really loved investigations. And I worked auto theft, and that's where I kind of got brought into the Billionaire Boys Club case, because one of the murder victims in the Billionaire Boys Club case happened to be a victim that I was communicating with on a daily basis, because he would call me up. He's a very gregarious guy. His name was Ron Levin, and he was a very well-known scammer, flim-flam artist. And coincidentally, he was also the subject of a parallel investigation by one of my colleagues, the next desk over, for scamming a company out of a bunch of television production equipment. And on my case, that television production equipment had been stolen from his automobile, and this is only a Hollywood case, right? This can only happen in Hollywood. And as it turns out, the individual who who stole the stuff was a drug addict and from an extremely prominent, very well-known historical acting family in Los Angeles. And so that was a very interesting case. I popped him and everything and, got him arrested and all that stuff. But all of a sudden one day, and I would talk to Ron every day, all of a sudden one day, the phone call stopped. And that was, unbeknownst to me at the time, that was when he was kidnapped by the suspects in the Billionaire Boys Club case, and they attempted to extort some money out of him, and then they killed him. And they shot him to pieces with a shotgun and dumped his body in an area in a very mountainous, rugged area north of downtown LA, or not downtown LA, north of San Fernando Valley in LA.
Okay, so
So,
just back for a second, if
sure,
you don't mind.
of
Maybe
course.
members of the audience who are not overly familiar with the Billionaire Boys Club case, they may have heard the name of it.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you can find a documentary or two on it out there
A
somewhere.
couple of movies. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Give us a brief overview of who they were and what they did.
Okay, so the Billionaire Boys Club, that's what they actually called themselves. They were pretty impressed with themselves. They were all a bunch of these kids who came from upper middle class or upper class families. There were several heirs to fortunes and prominent names and people like that. And they all went to the same private school together and they all became buddies. And this one guy who was sort of the ringleader of the club developed this investment strategy that I think it was called the chaos theory or some kind of humdrum nonsense. And anyway, so he convinced all of them to, come together and we're going to form this investment corporation. And so they get suits and they rent office space in West Hollywood and they do all of this stuff playing at being successful businessmen, but they don't have any money really. They're running out of their seed money. So they hear about Ron Levin. I think they meet him at a party, and he convinces them that he's going to invest money in their company, that they can, turn around and invest in this strategy that they have. But unbeknownst to them, the money that he said was in this account didn't exist. So, so he scammed them too, but unfortunately paid for that with his life. And the interesting thing about that is, when they were extorting him, he wrote a check on his Swiss bank account, which he convinced them was the source of his funds and everything, that had no money in it. So he even scammed them in his last moments of life, which was pretty amazing. And it was a very interesting case. And working in Beverly Hills was an amazing experience. And met a lot of really great people. It's a very, very a really outstanding police organization. I worked with a couple guys from New York, like we were talking about, and it was really great. And the people were very, very supportive, and there was plenty of action to go around. That was the only time I've ever been shot at in my life was in Beverly Hills by a crazy guy who had an M2 carbine and was shooting heroin and cocaine at the same time, which is kind of makes you do some crazy stuff. Yeah, and he took a shot at me. I roll up to the scene of this thing, and it was right off of Wilshire. And I get out of the car, and I'm like, okay, another BS shots fired call in Beverly Hills, which is usually a backfire and nothing more, right? And I get out of the car, and all of a sudden I hear this pop, 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 and I went, oh crap, this is real. Oh man. So I grab the shotgun and, take a position of cover, and then all of a sudden pop again and bing, right off this piece of metal that's right next to my head. I was like, okay, this is real.
Wow. We've all been there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure probably more than me, I'm sure. But that was an interesting moment. But it was really a great place. Got into some amazing pursuits and some crazy stuff and everything, and worked great people. But and then I because I wanted to be an investigator full time, and I knew that you have to go back to patrol on these small agencies. And actually, I did go back to patrol, and so then I applied to the LA County DA's office and got hired as an investigator with the DA's office. And I worked, fraud cases and stuff like that. I worked a huge welfare fraud case where I ended up serving paper on the suspect who had like 6 or 7 open cases in all kinds of AKAs. And she lived in North Las Vegas, Nevada, and she would fly in on Southwest Airlines from Vegas twice a month to pick up her checks. It's a wonderful thing. And the amazing thing about that was, the really disturbing thing about that was, and this is government in action, as we all have spent our lifetimes in government, we all know all about this, is the superiors on these for these caseworkers would actually get in the faces of the workers that were cooperating with my investigation, because it was embarrassing for them. Instead of trying to aggressively root out the fraud, they were trying to dissuade the manager was trying to dissuade the caseworkers from working with me on the investigation. Now, isn't that special? Isn't that
That's
something?
special.
That's really
Crazy.
disgusting, you know.
You know,
And
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you for
no,
one
go ahead.
second
No,
quick.
please.
We have run right down the field past something we think is kind of important, and it may explain a lot about you and your motivations.
Yeah,
We talked a
yeah,
little bit about your father and his influence on your life and your
right.
career and its trajectory. So tell us a little bit about that, if you
Absolutely.
don't mind going into it. I know it's
No,
personal, but
no.
yeah.
I firmly believe that there are lessons to be learned from what happened to my father. So, in 1979, I was in the Sheriff's Academy. I was in the third week of academy training. My dad was with the Harbor Patrol, as I said, and he was a Sunday afternoon in Marina Del Rey. Actually, it was in the morning, late morning in Marina Del Rey, and which is this idyllic harbor, beautiful setting. And I don't know if you guys have ever been there or know it, but anyway, um, my dad was working on the land side, and he would patrol those areas on a three-wheel motorcycle, because you can't really get an automobile through those narrow breezeways between buildings and stuff, so they would use this. And my dad rolled up to a parking lot right next to a steakhouse there. And this woman who I later talked to, well, actually about 8 or 9 months ago, I talked to her. She was an eyeball witness who was never interviewed by the police. At the time, she was an 18-year-old college student. She saw the whole thing, and she said, there was these three men standing in the parking lot. One of them had a knife in his hand, and he turned around and looked at me and said, "I know how to use this." And so she got scared. And then at that moment, my dad rolls up on the motorcycle, and unbeknownst to, I mean, he had no idea what was going on or anything about that. So she starts to run over to tell him about it. And at the same moment, the suspect, armed with a knife, starts approaching my father. And my father, and about 10 feet, my father sees him and sees the knife, and starts to get off his motorcycle. And as he does so, um, uh, uh, he's trying to draw his weapon at the same time. And it's a big, clumsy motorcycle, and he's in his 50s, and and so he's getting off the motorcycle. Witnesses said that he was struggling to get his gun out, but the woman said that she thought he was actually hesitating a little bit, because he was looking at the guy and trying to figure out what was going on. And so he gets his weapon out and puts the bike between him and the suspect. And the guy goes around the bike and breaks into a run. And at about 6, 7 feet, something like that, my dad trips, and as he's falling backwards, he gets off one shot and hits the suspect in the left hip. And it was a 38 special, and my dad falls on his back, and the suspect falls on top of him. And I'm sorry, he stabs him in the solar plexus, and my dad was not wearing a vest. And then he falls backwards, and the suspect jumps on top of him. And he then cuts dad's right carotid artery, and then opens him up, basically. And then he picks up my dad's gun, and he walks to a cabana area where there's a beach, and he dumps the shells out, the live ones and the empty, and sticks it in his waistband. And he's covered in blood. He's got my dad's blood on him. He's got his own blood on him from the bullet wound in his chest, in his left hip. And he He walks through the cabana area, which is a kiddie beach area where there's mothers and kids and all these innocents running around. And somebody picks up the microphone on my dad's bike and says, officer down, officer needs help. And so two sheriff's deputies are responding in two one-man cars. And they encounter the suspect uh, at a bike rental place, and he slashes at them when they start giving him orders, and so they cap a couple rounds at him, and they miss, and they go in foot pursuit of him and chase him across Admiralty Way to what is now a Marriott, but was back then a vacant lot, and one of them took very careful aim and popped him and knocked him down, and he died. He expired at the scene, and of course, my dad's wounds were fatal. Um, now, um, the important takeaways from this were several. First, that morning, my dad and I had actually had breakfast, and we talked about what had happened the night before when I'd gone on a ride along with Manhattan Beach, and dealing with some drunks and that kind of thing. And then we talked about use of force. And right at that moment in time, there was a major brouhaha going in Los Angeles and called the Eula Love case. And LAPD officers were investigating an assault with a deadly weapon. Eula Love had hit this gas company employee in the head with a shovel when he came over to turn off her gas. And so LAPD responded to investigate that, which is a felony. And they get out of the car and they start to walk up, and she meets him at the door with a 12-inch butcher knife. And, they draw down on her, and she throws a knife, and they shoot, and they killed her. So the LA Times, probably just like the New York Times, said LAPD was there, shoot a woman while they're there collecting on a gas company bill, which of course is complete horsepucky. That is not what happened. So I know damn good and well that my dad was thinking about that because we talked about it 3 hours before. I know he was thinking about it. Now, the other thing is my dad had dealt with this guy 3 weeks earlier. Actually, let me back up and say this. This individual he was a nut. Okay. He was what we call a 5150 in California, but he was absolutely whacked out of his mind. Supposedly a disabled veteran from World War II, supposedly a fighter pilot who lost his marbles. And basically what happened was he picked up a rifle, got into a lover's quarrel with his roommate, picked up a rifle and started blazing with it and shot at police officers who responded. My dad was one of those that responded, and was taken into custody, was adjudged mentally insane, and was sent to a Tuscadero State Mental Hospital for 18 months. And then after 18 months, he was released and given and told to self-medicate and given Thorazine and told to self-medicate. Well, of course, he's a nut. So, a violent nut. So he stops taking his medication, and this is the result. And so when my dad encounters this guy on the day of the incident, he's already dealt with him before on 2 other occasions. The second occasion was I happened to be there at the time. My dad was the acting watch commander for a graveyard shift there at the Harbor Patrol. And I could hear him going back and forth on the radio with this crazy guy on the radio who was making all these demands. I need, somebody to come tow me in and all this other stuff. And they couldn't deploy anybody because they had other things going on far more important. So the guy came in and beefed my father and took his business card. And later on, and he told my mom about it, that I'm probably going to get beefed by this guy, blah, 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 blah. And so when sheriff's investigators are investigating the case, they find my dad's business card in his car on the dashboard. And they're like, how did that happen? So somebody tells me about it. And I said, I know exactly how it happened. This is what happened here. So this was really, and here's another factor that we talked about in terms of training. My dad qualified quarterly, probably, but I know how he qualified because we did the same shooting in the academy at the same range. Point shooting at a bench, not from the holster. And Um, so when he's training, the gun is in his hand. He's not pulling it from a holster, so he's not used to pulling it from a holster. And he was using a Bianchi break front, which was a high security holster. And to get that gun out, you have to mean it. You have to really jerk it out. Like, you can't be any hesitation, or it will retard the pull. So the other lessons are, of course, training and familiarization with your equipment. My dad shot single action. He always shot single action. Whenever we would go shooting, he always shot single action. I know damn good and well that when he was backing up, he cocked the hammer on that revolver, and it probably went off because it's a tense moment and it's a very light trigger pull on single action on a Smith and Wesson, we all know. And it probably discharged before he wanted it to, before he had it on the guy's chest. I'm not sure that would have mattered, because we also know that if you're that close to a bad guy armed with a knife, you're going to get hurt badly, if not killed. And one shot is not going to do it. It's just not. So, and I've always kind of blamed the media for causing that hesitation, because of the mischaracterization of the incident and how they spun it into something that met their own agenda. And so, I when I hear idiots say, "Well, I don't understand why they just don't let the knife bounce off their chests, or because they're wearing bulletproof vests, or a knife isn't the same as a gun," that's BS. I'm sorry, it's not true. Anybody armed with a knife is a very, very formidable adversary, and you've got to get really lucky to get the right shot in to drop them before they're on you and cutting you to pieces. I mean, we've probably all had that same training. And you can have a gun in your hand and the guy is on you, and you know what's going to happen, and the guy is still on you, cutting you before you can get your first shot off, at 20 feet, let alone 10 feet. So that's why I tell the story. It's hard, but I think it's really important. And the police officers out there that listen to this, I hope that they heed what, or are able to glean something from that incident. I know my dad would want me to tell the story.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? Other than it being a heartbreaking story, and coming from a law enforcement family, with my father being an NYPD detective, Danny had his uncle in his household, in his family, in the NYPD, and we both drew from that, as an inspiration to join the police department, as you did. And the other thing that caught me, that just I shake my head at, and we brought this up on the show before. You're talking about 1979, and you look at today in 2023, and back then is the same as today. If the media and politics get involved in law enforcement, it puts every officer at risk, because that
Absolutely.
news report from the night before, like you and your dad talked about, plays a role in what you do that day on the job and on the street. And the politicians and the media don't get that. A, because they have no idea what we do. They have no idea how it's done and how quickly things happen. But you just notice the similarities in then and today, and the other part of, okay, he's not a bad guy, give him help, and then he's back on the street in a couple of
Hmm.
months doing worse things,
Absolutely.
which
Yep.
took the life of your dad.
Yep.
And, you know, those things don't work. Those policies don't work. It's obvious. And we're talking again, 1979, and the same thing's going on today in 2023. And,
Absolutely.
the training, and people just having to wake up to this notion that, oh, everything's okay, and rainbows and butterflies and stars isn't the way the world is. Uh, and it's a heartbreaking story, but I know, Gary, you're looking at your career, you pulled every ounce of inspiration you could from your dad and the relationship that you had. I know it was tight, uh,
Hmm. It
into
was.
the rest of your career, and he's proud of you.
It's true. Well,
Yep.
I appreciate that. Thank you very
No, that's
much. I
sure.
truly appreciate that.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Gary. I can understand and relate to how difficult it is to talk about any kind of loss that's personal, but
Right.
this one is really personal and really
Yeah.
applicable to the rest of your career. But
Yeah.
all the points that have been brought out by it, and thank you for using it to that. To not just it's not just a sad, terrible, tragic story. It's a lesson to be learned, and I like that you take that. And it is a lesson to be learned. And the people listening to this show who are not in law enforcement need to understand something. Nobody goes to work to kill anybody, and nobody goes to work to get killed. We have a
So
right to go
true.
home like everybody else. We have a right to defend ourselves. We have a right to defend the public. And we are trained to do that. And when we do it, you better give us the benefit of the doubt. Unless it's obvious that it was a gross misuse, abuse of authority, it was an inappropriate use of deadly physical force. If that is not the case, let the facts roll out as the investigation reveals them. Because more often than not, when someone jumps to the punch and says the officer was wrong, and we've seen it by our mayors, we've seen it politically, it has been horrific. We have friends who have dealt with that firsthand, their uses of deadly physical force, more than justified. So I ask the public, anybody who's listening, give us the benefit of the doubt unless it's obvious, because the chances are good. We're human beings. We are human beings trying to get home to our families, trying to do the right thing, trying to protect people. And just the other day, I watched a video that came out, I think yesterday. A young officer somewhere in this country was attacked by a truly psychotic, obviously psychotic person, captured on body cam with a hammer.
Yeah.
And she fired off. You can hear the shots. I don't know how it ended, except it was nasty, and it's a horror movie happening in front of your eyes. These people are out there. Our society has people who are mentally ill, who are not treated, not on meds, who are violent by nature, and whose mental illness only makes that worse. Alcohol, drugs, all make it worse. And cops have to deal with them. That's our job. We deal with these people all the time. And the restraint that's used is unbelievable. How many times, I can guarantee, I'm talking to the two of you right now, how many times in your career have you not used deadly physical force when it was way more than justified? Because you sought another way, because
Right.
you're not a killer. You
Right.
don't want to kill people.
Right.
You want to solve
Exactly.
situations and make peace.
Right.
And people need to know that. That's what cops are all about. Not
It's true.
not this wanton lust for kill and blood individual that they seem to portray us as. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that, Gary, in the way that you did. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it. And I think that that eh, you know we all know that that police administrations bow to outside pressure and leave people hanging. And we've seen prosecutions that should never have seen the light of a courtroom ever. I think of that Brooklyn Center female police officer who screwed up. And, I mean, the guy had a warrant for his arrest for carrying a deadly weapon, for carrying a firearm. Okay. And so they are on heightened awareness as they approach the vehicle to arrest him for that warrant, and they're expecting trouble. He resists, which he's not supposed to do if he's going to be a good person. And everything goes to doo-doo afterwards because, of course, she thought she was pulling her taser, which is a failure of training, and not her. That's a failure of training. I was a range staff guy. That's training right there. And she goes to prison, and her life is ruined. Her family's ruined, and she's horrified because she killed this guy. She had no intention of killing him. You could hear it in her voice, when she's talking about it. I mean, and and we all know about all of those things. And how many guys have we worked with, officers, male and female, who've been killed in the line of duty? Many of them by individuals who were supposed to be in prison. You know, but we're not, because the system failed and they got released and they came out and they reoffended and they killed a police officer. And here's the other thing that I think people need to keep in mind, that, you know, A person who wants to take the police on and shoot it out with the police would not think twice about taking on a civilian. And the civilians need to recognize that people that are willing to fight it out with the police and go toe to toe with people who are trained and well armed would not think twice about, you know, sticking a gun in your face and taking your BMW as you're leaving the mall, not twice, and blowing your brains out all over your wife. That's the reality. There are bad people out there. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people um, in this country who have lost sight of that. And it's sort of like the whole common sense thing is sort of like taking a vacation, because there are really awful people out there who are just virtually irredeemable, who are predators, you know and unfortunately our business is to deal with them, you know or was was to deal with them. I hasten to add, I'm so
Yeah.
glad I'm not on the job anymore. I am so glad. I look at those poor kids going out there now, and they're all excited and they're full of, energy. I'm going to save the world and blah, 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 blah. And, they show up at a scene and something goes wrong. And all of a sudden, through no fault of their own, they
Was.
are now involved in a federal prosecution or investigation or something like that. And that it has a chilling effect on law enforcement. Absolutely. For recruitment, for professionalism, for everything. So, get off my soapbox. Yeah, yeah, right. Mhm.
No, that's what we do here. It's an
Yeah,
emotional, we love the
yeah,
emotion in it, and it's important, to
yeah,
get these
yeah.
conversations out when it involves law
Okay.
enforcement, what's going on today. Uh, but what I want to
Well,
do,
I was working
you
in
had
the narcotics and
sort of a
organized
famous case
crime
that you kind of worked
intelligence
on a
unit
little in the LA
when that
County
case went
DA's
down,
office that one or two
and
people in the country might
we
know
had
about.
actually followed
So why don't
an
let's hit
associate
that one up
behind a
before we get on to
narcotics
the rest of your
investigation. So we were
incredible
aware
career.
uh, of of um, of that whole circle of OJ and some of his friends and stuff like that. So, fast forward, here's the homicide, and then of course I will never forget and the day of the low speed chase in the Bronco, which of course we in this business kind of call a consciousness of guilt move. I don't know. Passport, gun, best friend driving the car, you're in the
Yeah.
back. I think there might be a little bit of a guilt thing going on there. Just
You
me, but
think? You think?
oh yeah, forgot about the wig. Hello,
And the
right?
cash? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And and he cut his hand and all the other crap. Anyway, so I would I once that happened and the prosecution team was picked.
Didn't he have a
um
wig?
Oh, I
Was
have a
there a
funny
wig in
story
there
for you
too?
related to that. You like funny stories? This is a funny one. So I'm standing
The
outside the
wig, yep.
DA's office on the 17th floor, and I'm kind of, there's a mob of reporters there, okay? And there's this one very famous reporter there, okay? And he is on the phone with his producer. There's a bank of cell phones, not cell phones, but pay phones right next to the actual district attorney's actual office, right? And he's on the phone with his producer. I could tell it's his producer, and he's screaming at him. He's saying, I don't care. I don't care. I have to be in the middle of this. I have to be in the middle of this. Blah, 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 blah. Damn, using very bad language and being very, very agitated as he's yelling at this producer. And um, I later met that guy several times. And it was a pretty funny thing because he was really like just going to town on this producer saying, I have to be in the middle of this. I have to be blah 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 blah, as if the story is about him as opposed to what really happened with the murder of two innocent people by a crazy guy. Um, but anyway, so I was I in that unit we were called upon to provide security for Marcia Clark, one of the lead prosecutor, and So I spent a lot of time protecting her and her kids and whatnot. I had known Marcia before. I knew Chris Darden very well. He was a baby prosecutor and I was a baby detective in Beverly Hills at the time, and we worked an amazing jewel theft case together and got a conviction on it. And so we both kind of cut our teeth together. And I always had such great respect for Chris Darden. He's such a decent, honorable guy. And so we provided trial support for the investigation, pretrial support for the investigation. But at that point in time, LAPD detectives Van Outer and Lang were the primaries on it from Robbery Homicide Division, so they were working on it, and it wasn't quite at the level of the prosecution yet. And in the interim, I had applied to the Department of Justice to be a special agent with the California Department of Justice and work in the Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement. So they called me before the trial really got started and asked me if I still wanted it. And I said, sure. So I ran off and left before the case really heated up. But it was really fascinating. Of course, I watched it. I knew all the personalities, including the people. They were monitoring that case on a daily basis upstairs on the 17th floor, and calling the shots and telling the prosecutors what to do and things like that, which, in my estimation, is never a good idea. It's the decision-making process should always be with the people who are the boots on the ground, and you have to trust those people to make those decisions. So a lot of that stuff was going. A lot of, obviously mistakes were made. I knew the judge too. I used to take search warrants to Judge Ito all the time. Awesome guy, great guy. But I think he also got caught up in it too. I think he got caught up with the celebrity of it all. His wife was an LAPD captain. So he's a very law and order guy, really good guy. And he was a DA before he became a judge. So it was really, that's a sad story and on all the way around. I'll never forget when they're announcing the verdict. I'm at the Department of Justice. We're watching it on TV, and I could see Chris, and he was probably nearly in tears. And it was heartbreaking because, like I said, I had such great admiration for him. He's such a great guy. And Marcia Clark is a very, very effective prosecutor. It's just one of those things, there were mistakes that were made and things happened, and, we move on. And of course, he got to spend some time in a very, very lovely and toasty, I'm sure, prison outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, which I'm pretty confident was not a very pleasant experience for him,
Well, he had to take a break. He was searching the golf courses of America for the killers, and
exactly.
My understanding is he was pretty close when he got arrested. So I'm hoping he's taking that back up again.
Yes, that is so true. It's like the French talking about World War II. Why did you guys invade on D-Day? We had the Germans right where we wanted them. And something that actually happened. I was that I actually heard that basically happening at a museum in Normandy when I was visiting the D-Day beaches and stuff, but it was pretty funny. But anyway,
just real quick to OJ for 1 second, one comment.
Yeah.
He wrote a book.
If I did it.
If I did it. Right? Is that what it's called? If I did
I
it?
think something like that.
So,
yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
And to read this book, I read it. It's fascinating. It is such a mea culpa. It is so clear he did it.
Right.
When you read this book, it's like it's just one great big maybe there was another guy there. And the other guy, his name was Charlie, and he had the knife, and he gave me you read it, it's just the world's worst ramblings and the worst lies you've ever been told in any interrogation you've ever done, put together in a book. And somebody put it out. And like a publisher said, this would be great. Let's put this out.
Yeah.
It is so bad. Oh my God. It's embarrassing. He should be embarrassed.
I was talking to somebody about that the other day, and they said, well, I think his son did it. And I said, no, let's stop for a second and think about this for a minute. Whoever the suspect is has to have the physical strength and the intestinal fortitude to basically shred 2 people, including a young, physically fit adult male and a physically fit female. We all know when people resist, you cannot, it's not easy. It is not easy. You may surprise one, you're not going to surprise the other one. And this is somebody who is very physically fit that did those murders. And who is our suspect who's physically fit in this whole thing? Who would that be?
Not Cato.
Orenthal James Simpson, maybe? Former football player?
Maybe.
Hello?
I got
the guy with the cuts on his hands?
there are so many red flag moments in this case.
I
And
know.
those of us that watched the case go down and were young fledgling cops and detectives and stuff at the
Yeah.
time, one of the most telling things is when he gets called. He's in Chicago. He's in the hotel room, and he gets called. Your wife's been killed. Oh my God! Oh, I'll get on the next plane. He never asked how. I mean, who does that?
That's
he
because
knows how.
because he
That's
just cut himself
Yeah.
in the bathroom in the hotel
on the glass.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know. I mean, it's just it stretches credulity beyond the breaking point with all of it. I mean, it's just, and he has such a nefarious history of beating this poor woman and doing all
Right.
kinds of crazy stuff. And he has such a huge ego because we gave him that ego because he's been idealized
Mhm.
as a a wonderful guy. This everybody loves him, football player, and then television comedic actor, spokesman for Hertz Rent-A-Car, all of that stuff,
Mhm.
And I was watching a movie producer talk about picking stars for you know what? It was the Arnold Schwarzenegger um, um, documentary, and this movie producer was talking about who are we going to get to be the Terminator, and they were talking about they were going to have O.J. Simpson do it before they got Arnold, and they said no, we can't have O.J. do it because nobody would believe that he would be a killer. Hey! Isn't that funny?
Hey, they do
Isn't that
remake.
something?
They do remakes all the time. We'll just remake it now. He'll fit right in.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll be back.
Exactly. He won't need a gun. He
No.
works really well with a knife, apparently.
All good.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, we could God, this show could go on for like just an eternity with just stories, but I just want to get to
Maybe I had a
our
lot.
next thing because Gary, listen, you're so impressive with your career, and
Thank
it
you.
took a while to kind of narrow down what we want to do. And one of the things with next month is a big month in this country, in New York, and in particular, and in 1999, you were assigned to the LA's JTTF before
Yes.
9/11, and then actually worked
Yes.
through 9/11.
Yes.
So
Correct.
take us through that time in LA, because LA played a prominent part in 9/11.
Yes, it did.
LA, Culver City, San Diego all played a big role in that. So take us through either the buildup or anything you could tell stories about pre 9/11 and actually that day and going forward.
Well, I went over there on a domestic terrorism squad, and so the targets. A big target was a hate group, a religiously based hate group that was accused of planning a bomb or did plan a bomb, and it fizzled, I think, something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was. So, and then there were some other things going on, hate, but it was mostly, the focus was mostly hate stuff. Okay. Nobody was taking a look at Jamaat al-Fuqra or any of these other groups that were operating domestically in the United States at the time. And the IT side people, the international terrorism side people, didn't talk much about what was going on, and it was not a collaborative environment by any means. It was the old bureau um, to the nth degree, and it was. And to be very, very honest with you, having spent my entire career as a detective and knowing how cases work and how you move cases forward, it was also one of the least collaborative environments I've ever worked in. you would have this is the days of the wall, where intelligence agents that were working intelligence stuff, and agents that were working criminal stuff, they could be working the same target, but they're not supposed to cross pollinate and talk about that stuff.
Yep.
Now, who can make a case like that?
Right.
That makes no sense at all. I mean, it's just that only a lawyer could come up with that. And somehow, strangely enough, that's who came up with that idea, a lawyer. And
Mhm.
it's a terrible idea. I mean, we all know that cases get solved over coffee or over lunch, where you go, oh, yeah, I had that guy. Yeah, he's so and so. You should go over to this location. He always hangs out there. A million cases get solved every day like that. You pick up your Rolodex, you call somebody. So that wasn't going on. And there was very little um, uh, analytical support, virtually almost none. I think there were maybe one or two out there to service the needs of dozens and dozens of agents. And of course, that is not adequate either. If you're going to be, if you're sifting through clues and leads and all that other stuff, you need people who are experts at sifting through that stuff and making sense of it. And
Mhm.
and they didn't have that.
Right.
So then, and there were whispers about bin Laden and things like that. Agents would talk about it and stuff, but there was nothing really real. But of course, if you read, you knew that these Al Qaeda was real and it was out there. Okay, and they had a very clear track record, and they've been very clear about what their goals were. They put it right out there in the shop window. We're coming for the United States and the West, and this is, we had Pent Bomb, which of course World Trade Center 1. We had Dar es Salaam embassy bombing. We had the Cole. We had all of these, are plus a myriad of other things that were all related to Al Qaeda, but nobody was really paying attention. And then 9/11 hits. I had just gotten promoted into internal affairs. Actually, no. Actually, I was already in internal affairs. I got promoted in January of 2001 and went into internal affairs, which is a whole other thing, which is fascinating. I'd never worked that before. It was an amazing experience. But I was at a training class in Sacramento on 9/11. I'll never forget waking up and turning on the TV. Probably been out drinking the night before, if truth be told. You know how those training classes are. But anyway, I was drinking root beer. Anyway, turn on the TV, and there's Perky Katie going,
Mhm.
yeah, it seems to be there's a fire at the World Trade Center. And I'm looking at that, I'm going, wow, that's a really bad fire.
Yeah.
And then, a few minutes later, boom, World Trade Center 2 gets hit. And then so now it's like, Katie barred the door. And so Sacramento is calling, and I go to headquarters, and everybody's running around with their hair on fire, and the Attorney General decides that we need to stand up our own counterterrorism intelligence collection and analysis function within the Department of Justice. And I already had security clearances, and I was sort of acting in a quasi liaison role with the Joint Terrorism Task Force while I was working internal affairs, because nobody had access except me. And then they called me and said, hey, do you want to stand up the task force in Los Angeles? And I was like, naturally, being a terrorism guy, going back to the mid 80s with the Bader Meinhof and the Red Brigades and all those guys, and now, Islamic fundamentalism, I was like, hell yeah, I definitely want to. And so we stood up the task force, recruited investigators, not only from the Department of Justice and intelligence analysis people. The Department of Justice had a very robust, historically robust intelligence analysis unit. It was always one of the things that they did very, very well. The narcotics enforcement side especially relied on intelligence analysis, and so we stood up that. We had investigators from the Highway Patrol, from Alcohol Beverage Control, from DMV, and from a myriad of police departments, Beverly Hills, DA's office, all these different agencies, and they were all on my task force. And our role was to develop targeting information intelligence and conduct our investigation covertly, uh, and then take that package, that target package, to an enforcement agency to run it out to the point where they can kick doors in and throw people in jail, whether that's the FBI or that was some other agency like LAPD. We worked a lot with LAPD, uh, Major Crimes Division. They're awesome. They were just the best detectives and the most awesome guys to work with. Guys and girls and I worked with a lot of them on the terrorism task force. And so we did that. And I'll give you a story about this that was really pretty interesting. It kind of tells you about the pre 9/11 FBI. So we had this informant who came to us that got popped on a narcotics case. And of course, they always want to talk. So this guy tells us, hey, I was in a lockup. And so there's these clerics that come in, and it was a federal lockup. And I think it was an INS lockup. And they're coming in and they're recruiting primarily African Americans, but Hispanics too, and trying to convert them into radical Islamic beliefs. And so we write it up, we thread it out, we totally run it to the ground and write it up and everything. And then and then we also verified it by the so-called Al-Qaeda manual, which some people say is rubbish, but other people say it's true, and it probably is because it makes sense. I mean, when you stop thinking about it from an operational standpoint, wouldn't you want, if you could have people who were American citizens and had American passports, who would you rather have as on your operation? Those guys or Saudi students who barely speak the language, don't understand the culture, and don't have American passports? Well, the obvious answer is you want Americans. So, so I took that into the Joint Terrorism Task Force and I briefed them on it. And they looked at me like I had 3 heads and 2 tails and was a complete idiot. Well, why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense. That's not following Islamic principles. Those are people that would not be encouraged to be part of that. Blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, fast forward like a year later, everybody's on board with this because it's real. It was LAPD, Sheriff's Department, the FBI. Everybody realizes, nope, this is really true. It's really happening, and they're really out there. And it was like, oh my God, guys. And it was it was the old FBI. And it didn't take till 2002 before that changed. And in 2002, the assistant director in charge in LA had heard enough about problems like this from LAPD and from others. And he basically went in one night and fired a bunch of supervisory special agents and brought in some new guys and girls who played well with others. Most of them had experience in working with locals on task forces. And so the atmosphere literally changed within a month's time from this kind of dysfunctional weirdness to a collaborative, collegiate environment. And it stayed that way until I retired in 2008. And it was amazing experience. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the agents I worked with. We provided analytical support. We had a native Farsi speaker. We did all kinds of stuff to help on investigations. We put together targeting packages for them and helped them and followed up on cases that they couldn't run with because it didn't match their criteria. And it really was a very positive experience. And but it took a while to get there, and it wasn't any surprise that you start hearing afterwards from the 9/11 Commission and other things that there were obvious clues, slightly more than clues, that something big was brewing, and it got ignored. And it wasn't surprising to anybody who had worked in that environment how that could happen, and it that was probably the high point. Running that task force and working on the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI and a myriad of other agencies was without question the high point of my career. And I felt like I was really doing something that mattered and meant something. We rocked through agencies that we were cooperating with. We rocked some worlds on some knuckleheads that were, a lot of funding cases, counterfeit goods, immigration fraud, the usual crap that these guys do. We also had an individual who was college professor who was from one of those fun countries who had very interesting travel patterns and all kinds of things, who was probably involved in some kind of really bad plot involving, uh, you know, homemade explosive kinds of things. And, it was, there's a story there too, but I don't want to sound like I'm going to beat up on the FBI all the time. It's not fair. But there was a problem. Let me just put it to you that way. There might have been a little tiny bit of a problem with that one.
Gotcha.
But, yeah, no, it was a great experience. And then I retired and went to the sandbox.
So tell us about that, because that bleeds into the
Yeah.
book. Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Well, I'd never been in the service, so and of course I have this interest in history and counterterrorism and all this stuff. This seemed like a natural fit for me, so I got hired as a what as a kind of quasi supervisor role individual, and deployed to Iraq with some other guys, and who went to different places. And I worked in the IED defeat, improvised explosive device defeat cell, at 10th Mountain Division headquarters, and then I also supervised or managed other individuals in a similar position that were stationed at various forward operating bases and joint security bases throughout southern Iraq. So I got to travel, which was the great part of that job, was actually leaving the flagpole and actually getting out there and going out with the guys in the field. That was really the fun part of it, and flying around in the helicopters and all that stuff. But one of the things that we instituted, myself and my partner, he ended up leaving, and so I ended up having to finish it, was asset forfeiture, because the guys were kicking doors in, especially the green soft guys, the Green Berets and SEALs and stuff like that, not the black soft, the tier 1 guys, but the other guys. They were seizing cash and doing all this stuff. Well, not seizing it. They were actually not doing anything with it, really, and so, as we know, money is virtually in a key aspect of any criminal activity, and there's a whole supply chain and funding apparatus involved with every bombing operation. There's a specific amount of money it costs depending on the complexity of the operation, and everybody has to get paid, from the bomb maker to the mopes that actually plant the bomb, who are the low-hanging fruit in the operation. Everybody has to get paid. So we came up with this strategy of utilizing the Iraqi criminal justice system, such as it is, to seize assets and do asset forfeiture, which actually was built into the Iraqi criminal code. The standards were quite a bit lower than what we have in the United States, as you might be surprised about. But yes, it can be done. And so we wrote up a policy for that, and it got adopted by the division, and hopefully it was implemented. And but you never know. But it makes sense for us who worked on the criminal side. You take their money and you take their cars and their boats and their toys, you really have an impact on them,
Yeah.
and they can't operate, especially with terrorism. They can't operate if they don't have funding, because they got to buy the stuff to make it, and they got to pay the people to do the reconnaissance and all that other stuff. And the other thing I did that was good was, one of the things that they didn't quite understand, they still didn't really understand, was they had to collect evidence, because cases were being brought against terrorists in the Iraqi criminal justice system. And you had to have evidence. You had to present evidence, like in a criminal case, which sounds crazy because this is supposed to be a war, but it really wasn't. It was now a pacification and almost a criminal operation. So that's why they hired people like me to come in and help the Army learn how to do all of this stuff. And that was one of the things we did. One of the things I did was I came up with a procedure for handling sniper shooting scenes, because they were a big problem. Soldiers were getting shot by snipers and things like that. But nobody really knew how to handle these scenes. And you process them just like you would process any shooting scene, homicide scene. You figure out, especially in a sniper situation, you got to figure out where the sniper's hide is, and then you go and you look for evidence: empty shell casings, food wrappers, bottle caps, all the stuff that you pick up at a crime scene, because it might have DNA evidence on it or something else. And that's how you put together, these investigations and start linking in, different incidents together, because you can, okay, this shell casing has the same markings from the extractor claw as this one over here and this one over here. But none of that was being done. What they were doing was, if they picked up evidence at all, they'd throw it all in a duffel bag in the middle of the room, which is actually in the book, by the way. And they wouldn't catalog where it was found, what it meant, and they wouldn't pay attention to DNA at all. They had a DNA lab there in country. They had all these really high-powered crime labs in Iraq, but they weren't collecting evidence the way it should be collected and properly. So they were missing out on a lot of this stuff. And so one of my jobs was to kind of re-educate them and kind of show them, okay, well, this is the way it's supposed to happen. You don't throw all this crap in a duffel bag. You actually take pictures of where you found it, and you put it in a plastic bag and wear gloves and try not to touch it too much. All those things that are pretty simple and straightforward for us, were we're not we're not on the radar for them. And it's understandable, because they're the Army. They're supposed to go in and kick the door in and kill everybody that's moving and blow up everything else. Interestingly, this is an interesting dichotomy. I went to a training class while I was over there that was put together by the Marine Corps to kind of evaluate how they were doing it, and they knew how to do it. They knew how to collect evidence. They did it correctly. The Marines, actually, they must have had a lot of reserve coppers helping them do it, because they definitely really had, as much as you can do in a war zone, they had it down. They really did. And so it was our job to help the Army, do the same thing, basically. So that was a big part of what I did over there, was that kind of stuff,
So it made an impression upon you, and you've probably already had a bit of an author in you,
Yeah.
because nobody just tackles a book without ever first thinking for a long time about it.
Huh.
And your book is fascinating, and we mentioned it before. Outside the Wire, it's a novel, and it's, I'm going to say,
There it is.
loosely based upon
Yeah.
upon your own experiences, to say the least. Yeah, there we go. Outside the Wire,
Promotion,
Gary
promotion,
Edgington.
promotion.
I got to tell you, I typically I like history, I like nonfiction and stuff, but this is because it's so close to true, but also it's just reads so easily and
Thank you.
well, and it's
Thank you very
written
much.
so well.
Thank you.
And if you were ever a cop or a detective and you can't relate to Rick Sutherland, your main
Right.
character, I don't know where you worked, because you didn't see anything.
Yeah,
That
it's true.
character is so well written and described as the burnt out guy who still has a commitment, has an honor to his duty. It's written from your heart, and it just
Yeah.
I can't recommend the book highly enough.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. That
tell
means
our
a great
audience
deal to me.
what you want to say about the book Outside the Wire.
Well, it was inspired by my experiences, not only in my career in law enforcement back in the States, but also my experiences in Iraq. And I tried to write a book that anybody who read and who had been to those places would go, "Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that place. I remember that crappy food on Friday. All of that stuff." And um, so that was because when I read, I enjoy that too. And one of the other things I thought is, and I know we're all cops here, and we watch, if we do watch a cop show or read a cop book, we can tell right away if it's written by somebody who knows what they're talking about and ever spent anything around cops, and somebody who hasn't. I don't know if you guys, were fans of Bosch, but you know, Yeah, there's stretches of credulity with that, but that, it's a drama. You have to do things. But in terms of the personalities, I've worked with Crate and Barrel, those two homicide detectives, the two older homicide detectives. I've worked with guys like that. They're perfect. So I tried to capture that. I tried to make the dialogue real and make the attitudes real. And I also tried to create a guy who's not a superhero. He's a guy who, he's not really in shape. He's not really out of shape. He just is. you know, you know. He's retired. He's
alive.
retired. He's retired. You know.
Yeah.
He's pissed that he didn't make captain or whatever, and all this stuff. And he's lamenting the fact that he's, if he'd have gotten shot, maybe he would have gotten promoted or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? And which is all real because that we all can relate to that stuff. And so I tried to create that. And he's divorced, which, that's also not that uncommon, let's face it. And so and he's also a bit of a lead follower, get out of the way guy, which is kind of what I am too. If I have a mission, it's like, all right, we're all going to pitch in together and we're going to do it. But if you're going to stand in my way, I may run over you because we have a mission and it's important. And that's Rick. And that was one of the things that was so interesting about my immersion into Big Army, as they call it, was the bureaucracy is like unbelievable, and the red tape and the nonsense. I mean, I'll never forget. What do you mean? I'm walking around on a base that also is shared by a bunch of Iraqis running around with machine guns and everything else, and their guns are probably loaded, and my gun has to be empty.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's
You're
a
right.
Beretta 9mm loaded with ball ammo, which is not so great either, but that's a whole other story. But I had one time, and this is in the book, this really happened to me. I'm on my way to go to PT, to go at the gym and whatnot. And I'm in my PT shorts and stupid Army PT belt, which don't even get me started on that one. And and, and this friggin' convoy comes out of the Iraqi camp, and they have one of these bongo trucks in front, or whatever the hell, the Hilux trucks in front, and it has a Dishka, which is a Russian equivalent of a 50 caliber machine gun. Okay, and there is ammunition. The belt is loaded in the action of the weapon, and I'm sure it's charged. And he points the gun at me. I'm in shorts and a t-shirt, nothing else, and he points the damn thing at me, which would just cut me in half, and I'm just going, are you kidding me? This is crazy. This is insane. And there were so many moments like that. I was in the chow hall one time, and this E5, this buck sergeant comes up to me and he says, "Sir," and I'm in uniform. We wore BDU uniforms, just like the Army. We had patches that said U.S. on them, so we didn't have rank patches, but we had uniforms that were indistinguishable from soldiers. But he came up to me and he says, "Sir," he says, "excuse me." And I look at him, and he's probably like 22, 23 years old. He says, "Your weapon is unsafe." And I'm going, well, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, goddamn right, it's unsafe. It's empty. What good is that? Sorry, I just had to say that. I didn't say that, but that's what Rick would have said. But anyway, he says it's not unsafe. And I'm thinking to myself, first off, why are you looking at me so closely that you can see that my gun is the safety is off on it? The magazine well is empty. What's the big deal? But yeah, it's like this bizarre stuff. I got sent to a division targeting meeting, and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to hear about blowing bad guys up. I'm going to see videos of bodies and all kinds of really cool stuff. You know what they talked about? Water and feeding chickens and goats and stuff like that. That's what a targeting meeting at the division level was. It was about weird stuff like that, as opposed to like really killing bad guys and stuff like that. And I'm like going, whoa, I'm in a different dimension here. And this is the dimension that Rick is fighting also. This weird dimension of, being in a hospitable place. They speak in a language that you don't understand. It's a different culture. And you know, it stinks. It also smells bad.
Sounds like parts of New York. I
And
mean,
oh my God,
we got
man, we were
languages,
in,
all kinds of languages. But
man,
so we could probably stay on with you for 3 hours, and we will
probably.
continue this offline, and we want to stay in touch with you. You're
Yeah.
just a pleasure to talk to.
Wow.
The stories just keep coming, but uh, thank you, seriously. Thank you
Thank you.
for your service and your career,
Oh man.
but for turning it into something where you want to help other people learn from it. That's the more important thing.
Thank you.
It shows your
Thank you.
commitment to service, and thank you for that.
Well,
Your book
I
is
appreciate that.
outstanding. Can't say enough about it.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else that you want to talk about that you're involved in, to let our audience know?
Well, let me give you my my website, which has links to other media appearances that I've done and things like that. It's HTTPS, you know, backslash whatever, GaryEdgingtonAuthor.com. My Instagram is GEdgingtonBooks, and I have a Facebook page that's GaryEdgington.author. And I really am not great at the social media stuff. It's such a pain in the neck. The hardest part about writing, I'm telling you guys, I always tell people this, people who say, oh, what's it like to write a book? Well, you know what? The easy part is writing the darn thing. The hard part is the promotion afterwards. I'm writing a
Yeah.
second book. I'm writing, it takes place 3 years later. It's a sequel. It's mainly based in LA. And Rick returns, Nancy returns, some of the other characters return that I really enjoyed and liked a lot. That you'll get to in the third act of the book, return. And of course, it's a daring attempt at saving the world and, you know, finding love and all that other stuff. But it's I'm working on it now, and it's much easier than the promotion, much easier. So yeah,
That's
but
outstanding.
That's great. And
oh man,
we'll get all those platforms out, you know, when we all the posts about the show, our
thank
website,
you,
everything that's going on with you. And just to echo Danny, this was an absolute pleasure.
oh
We
man,
had an idea what it was going to go like, and it went that way. But you know, Gary, we say this all the time too. We're lucky to have the guests that we have, and you're no different. You're so impressive,
oh,
and you're so
thank you,
inspirational with how you draw from your dad and how you put that forward into your career.
thank you.
And you know, you're something else. It's impressive as hell. We tried to write down stuff to talk about. We're like, all right, we're running out of paper. Yeah.
Yeah.
uh, you know,
You know
so
that.
we just can't thank you enough for your time, your
Thank you,
dedication, your
thank
service,
you,
your love for this country and what you've done for it on
thank
every
you,
level. You know, on a police
thank you,
department level, on a international level. Hats off to you, buddy. Really, thank you very
thank you,
much.
man.
And
Thank you,
we can't
gentlemen.
wait to meet you in person, break bread, raise a glass, and continue the stories we were
Oh
telling
yeah,
before we started
we
recording. And
definitely have to do that.
my
We
sides are
definitely have
still
to do
hurting.
that.
Ladies and gentlemen, funniest guy you'll ever meet. I mean, what a riot! We're gonna have to do this over some cocktails, that's for sure.
We didn't even talk about the jar case.
No,
No, oh no,
And
no,
believe me, that's a good one.
yeah,
and we will
we're
because
gonna,
we have to have
yeah,
you back on. I mean, because you're
Oh,
gonna
thank you.
first of all you're gonna have the other
mhm,
book, so that's a
Right.
given that you have to come on about that. Uh,
yep,
but just you know, I'm sure there's 10 stories we didn't hit, you know, that we
Yeah.
would love to. So
yeah.
open
The jar
invitation to
case
you,
being
brother.
one of them.
Thank you,
Yeah,
man. Thank you
Yep.
so much. This was such a pleasure. It's like, you know, when we talked on the phone, I said, "Oh my God, these guys are going to be great. These are going to be guys that I will feel like I've known for a long time." You know, and
oh,
that's exactly the way it is.
we feel the same way about you.
Where's
So
my
thank
pint of
you.
Guinness?
For fuck's sake, go get one now here.
Slancha.
Slancha. All right. Tom, take us out as you always do. And thanks again, Gary.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, to Gary Edgington, who is just an absolute pro in this show, in his career, and we thank him very much for that. And as we do every week, say a prayer for our law enforcement officers out there, our military vets out there. They need our prayers. They need our support. Not only the men and women doing their job, but their families, because their families are home, wondering what's going on with them. while they're on the street, while they're deployed, and they need as many prayers as we can give them as we do our men and women in uniform. So keep them all in your prayers. And like I always say, give them a fist bump in the store, give them a wave, say hello, say thank you, because it means the world to them when that happens. So don't forget to do that. On a show note, don't forget our new Gold Shields channel on YouTube, youtube.com/@goldshields, which I know Gary subscribed to today because I saw it, and a big hats off to him
hit
for
that
that.
button, hit that subscribe button.
So
It's the only subscription, doesn't cost you anything, I think. Just hit
nothing,
it.
it's free.
Yeah.
Just hit a button.
Mhm.
And I know Gary did that today, so thank you for that. It means a lot to us. We're happy we're able to do that part of the show for you on YouTube as well as our audio platforms. So keep it coming. We do this for you. We do this for our guests. Danny and I have very little to do with this show and what we're putting out there. It's all about our guests and what they're doing and the entertainment for our audience. So thank you for the continued support, which Danny and I are blown away by every week. So for Gary Edgington, my partner in crime, Danny Murphy, this is Tom Smith one more time from Gold Shields, telling everyone out there, please stay safe, and we'll see you soon.